Sweet. Well, thanks, everybody. My name is Ben, and I work at a company in Dublin called IGS Energy, where I do work in the product and UX space, which kind of is a big reason why I like this topic, because I view the product space as really making sure that the things you do are telling a compelling story and they're solving a real problem. I wanted to start by saying thanks, and by that I mean I know that we've spent all day in these really dark rooms that are pretty cozy, and we just had lunch, and so thank you for all being awake and here. I appreciate it. So thanks for that. I think that there's a common thing that probably ties us together. I imagine this room is very cross-functional. People have a lot of different talent areas, but some convergence of these concepts probably brings us all together, right? Like everybody's, I would imagine, interested in business growth and progress of some kind, because we all exist inside of a business, and our businesses live this natural life cycle where they start, they grow, they mature, and then possibly decline, right? And that part can be kind of uncomfortable. We don't want that to happen, and it can kind of feel like this inescapable thing, almost like this black hole. Oh, I apologize. That is not what those look like. It can almost feel like a black hole, when really it's not unavoidable. There are these inflection points that we can have that cause the business plan to sprout again. We have this new normal, the status quo shifts, and then again that we're susceptible to the same thing because the propulsion of just life and technology makes it to where your business plan can never really survive forever, so you have to do it again. And that's kind of fun, and that's really what a lot of us are here to do. So I think something interesting to explore, and a thing that is always fascinating for me, it's one of my favorite conversation topics, is like, what is that? Like, what is that inflection point that allows us to keep our business going despite the short lifespan of our business plan? And I would like to make the argument that that thing is really just change, right? Like, we need to change as tech changes, as the environment changes, as customer needs change, we need to change what we're delivering. And that change needs a mechanism, right? The change is an inflection point for the business, but what causes it to happen? And I'm going to make the argument right now that that is you. And I do not mean that in the hyperbolic, rah-rah, let's all feel good about ourselves way. I mean literally this particular crowd. I might not have this slide if we were with a different crowd, and the reason I say that, so it's like, no, I really mean you guys. Because I think there's this crowd, and I won't say developer, I won't say QA, like it's just, there's this group of us that are focused in the technology space that have a very interesting vantage point of the businesses that we're in. We sit at this cross-section of all the different driving forces inside of the business, right? There's somebody's focused on strategy, somebody's hearing out customer desires, and a lot of the time people like us are thinking about technical requirements, but we also have the unique ability to sit right in between all of that, which means that you can usually come up with the ideas that allow the change to occur. So that's it, right? Done. Presentation's over. Good job. Ideas that come from you guys. Obviously, that's not exactly the case, or else nobody would be in here, and I'd be the only one with this problem. But I want to walk through a little scenario. So this is kind of like a little mini crowd participation thing. How many people have been in a spot where your business is searching for that inflection point, right? There's this conversation happening about strategy of some kind, and you have that idea. I think I know what we need to do to stay relevant and to keep the business plan going, but you see this in return, and so the decision is made differently, and things don't go that well, and then you're sitting there like this. Has anybody experienced that before? All right, so we have some honest people and then a bunch of people who are liars. Okay, so why does that happen at all? And I think it's this concept, I think this may not sound great right at first pass, but I think if you think about it, you'll find it to be true, that work is not necessarily, I'm not saying it's not entirely, but it's not necessarily speaking a meritocracy. Just having the idea doesn't mean, and it being the right idea, doesn't mean that it happens. And I think that use case and the people who've experienced it are proof of that. What actually does drive the decisions that are taken up? I think one way to figure that out is to look at who are some successful change agents. Like them or hate them, I think this is a group of people that it's impossible to argue with, or have been very, very big time successful change agents. And all I mean by that is that the idea that they wanted to move forward moved forward in a big way. One of my favorites, Steve. So we have Holmes, MLK, and Joseph McCarthy. So it's interesting. So, You might say, whose ideas get done? And it's like, oh, obviously the person with the best ideas. Well, I would argue that all of these people's ideas were very successful, at least for a span of time, but I would not necessarily argue that each of them had maybe the best idea. Some of them did. I'm really into what Steve did. I think revolutionizing personal computing has changed my life. My computer's sitting here. I use an iPhone. I have an Apple Watch on. Like, this guy changed everything in a really positive way. Elizabeth Holmes was in the same space, but what she did was defraud people of hundreds of millions of dollars. MLK did some cool stuff, pushed social change forward. That's neat. That's cool. Joseph McCarthy, ruined a lot of people's lives and created political repression because he was overreacting to stuff. So, okay, if having the best possible idea is not what ties all these people together, then what gives? And I think that it's really important for us to call out, and I'm not saying ideas aren't important, because ideas are incredibly powerful, and facts are super important. But if you can walk out of here with anything, I think one thing important is to notice that stories are what actually move people. You're fighting against entropy almost, like you're fighting against complete lack of movement. You need to be able to move people to make your idea work. And so one question I'm going to ask you a bunch of times today is that when you have that idea, how badly do you want it to live? Because there are people out there, whether or not their idea is the right one or the wrong one, who want their idea to live, and they're going to work, and they're going to move people. And that kind of gets us into what I want to talk through here. So if you can leave the room thinking about anything, I won't think about this as a workshop. I'm not going to tell you how to do this holistically, and there you go, you'll have a 10-step list. It's more about what can I have you think about on your way out of this room. It'll be why compelling stories matter, how you can use them to create actual change, and then just some things to think about that'll help you do that more successfully. So when we talk about why matters, why stories matter, so you have this idea, right? And you know that it is going to potentially be an inflection point for your entire business. So how are you going to convey that to your peers, to decision makers, to people that need to get things done, the people with the purse strings? You're probably going to do a presentation, right? Nancy's one of my favorite people on presentation strategy and how to really resonate with people, and she talks about how presentations really are currency in business. I think words are one of our most effective ways of doing anything and communicating with each other. If that wasn't true, we wouldn't have conferences like this where one guy stands and talks to a bunch of people. Yet, there's a problem here, which is that most of the presentations we sit in front of are super boring. Some of them are really bad, and at the best case, they can just be really boring. So why is that? I think part of it is that the general template you're handed is like, hey, you got an audience, you need to give them an analytical appeal, you'll get what you want, right? When really, I think that the math is a lot more complicated than that. It's kind of like, hey, you need an audience, you need an analytical appeal, but then you have to have some passion and excitement. You need to have empathy for the people you're talking to, and then you need to have a call to action. People aren't just going to mobilize because you had an idea. You don't need to read this whole quote, but I find it interesting. This guy has a really good point where people don't just want to hear things that are logical. They want you to make them feel things, to make them think, to make them contemplate. We're pretty emotionally driven, despite whether or not we like to think about that, and that's a lot of how we make decisions. So in order to resonate that point, just in case it doesn't sit with you yet, I wanted to give a little juxtaposition. Let's test this out. So let's look at two different ways of telling a little story or bringing a little point up. So we have a scenario. We have a spaceship, and it's floating away. We need it, but because this guy is dumb, it's floating away from us. It's in a flat spin. It's moving about 67 RPMs. Basically making it impossible for us to get it. But, the good thing is our pilot doesn't believe in anything being impossible. In fact, he believes that this must actually happen. So he withstands incredible G-forces, and, we're going to be fine now. So who's feeling like just pumped and ready to go and like really motivated, right? Okay, so that's one way of getting this point across. I would love to, rather than tell you, show you another way of getting the same point across.
Cooper, there's no point using our fuel to
Analyze the endurance of spin.
Cooper, what are you doing?
Docking.
Endurance rotation is 67, 68 RPM.
Okay, get ready to match our spin with the retro thrusters.
It's not possible.
No, it's necessary.
Endurance is hitting stratosphere.
She's got no heat shield.
Pace, you ready?
Ready. Cooper, this is no time for caution.
Pace, if I black out, you take a stick. Stars, you ready to engage the docking mechanism?
Endurance is starting to heat.
20 feet out.
I need 3 degrees starboard, Cooper.
10 feet out.
Cooper, we are lined up.
Initiating spin.
Come on, Tars. Come on, Tars. We are locked.
Easing up. Easy.
Easy.
Retro thrusters. Main engines on. Pushing out of orbit. Come on, baby. Killing main engines. Okay, we're out of orbit.
So if that doesn't do anything for you, then I can't either. So thanks for coming. So obviously, when you scan through the YouTube comments when watching this thing, most people were like, "Yo, matching RPMs to redock was a really good idea." No, that's not how people felt. They weren't really worried about the idea. They were thinking about how they felt about it. So obviously, we don't have Hans Zimmer or Nolan to help us out. But I think we have a pretty powerful tool, which is telling people a story. And so I ask you again, how badly do you want your idea to live? Because some people are going to pitch theirs like that, whether they're the right one or not. And I think those of us that know the right way to move forward are going to need to put that kind of effort in to move people. So let's talk a little bit about how we do this, right? So you have this idea. And really, what that means is that you need to act as a guide for the people that you need to build buy-in with. If you were able to do this idea completely by yourself, this whole presentation wouldn't be that useful a tool to you. And so I'm just going to assume that you need the buy-in and resonance of people in order to make the idea happen. So how can you create a following out of an idea? I think there's a pretty simple framework. Obviously, you can get pretty complicated about this stuff, but there's a pretty simple framework. And I'm not saying you need to use this as a checklist, but there's some stuff you can think about as you're building a presentation that will hopefully help you sway people. And so I always like to start with why. So Why does this matter? Why does a topic that I want to talk to you about matter? And to be completely honest, if we're talking about the 80-20 principle, this is really 80% of your presentation. People don't need to be inundated by all the technicalities of how. They really need to know why they should be listening to you, and if you're able to build resonance around that, they're probably going to give you the leeway to execute on the idea. So this is huge. We'll get into what I mean by this in a little bit, but what is the gap between where we are right now and what you're proposing? And that really helps you build a pretty big case for why, because that usually means a pain point. The next thing is what. So, okay, what do we need to do about it? And then how does executing on this what make the vision that you painted to us during why a real reality? And then what you can do there is, okay, once you have buy-in on that idea, so you've taken people from why should you be listening to me in the first place, to what do I think you should do now that I have your attention? You're moving people slowly from apathy to skepticism to curiosity, right? So now that you have them in curiosity, how do we need to move forward? So what is the plan? What tools do we need to actually be successful? And then the last thing, which I think is really powerful to leave behind, I keep saying move people because, again, having an idea and convincing people that it is a good idea doesn't necessarily mean they're going to execute. So you need to have an ask of some kind. What are you expecting people to do? And I think that's really important. So again, we won't get crazy tactical here, but let's just talk a little bit about what each one of these things really means. So ideas need buy-in to live, right? You need people's buy-in. So what does your audience want? This is a really, really big thing I like to focus on whenever I'm sitting in front of people is what do they want to do? Obviously, in a technical scenario, you have an outcome that you'd like to achieve and potentially a way of doing it. But I would be interested in the results if you were to take time and think about the people that you need to pitch this idea to, what things that may be completely disparate from what you're trying to pitch do they need to achieve? And then how can you help them get that thing by using your idea? Because then they're not focused on the thing you were trying to solve necessarily. It's an extra benefit. They're focused on the fact that your idea is going to help them execute on some objective of their own as well. In the same, we need to continuously push people back and forth between the current state and the ideal state. You are envisioning that next business plan life cycle, right? So there's some difference between what is now the status quo at the moment and where you want to be. And you need to make that very obvious because usually pointing that kind of thing out points out a pain point. And it helps people envision something better. Who doesn't want to be motivated by the next thing? So I like to think about this way. You need to take them on a ride during this why part of your presentation between look at where we are right now and why it doesn't work. Look at where we could be. Look at the status quo. Look at the state of dreams, right? This is the thing you need to take them through. So think as you're building a presentation, why are people listening to you and how can you help them get where they want to go? Because, again, you need to inspire action out of people. So then we talk about what. So let's say you've moved people from apathy to skepticism. What is your solution to this point that the idea that we're in a status quo and that there's some ideal dream state? You need to remind them of how your particular vision is going to help execute on getting you to an ideal state. And then remind them of the problems it solves and how it fits into the larger context. So then when we talk about how, I'll just be plain, you don't need me for this. I think this is where technical expertise and that whole idea that you guys, this room is the change, that's where this thrives, right? Like, this is where you can go into, okay, cool, I've moved you all the way from apathy to skepticism to curiosity. How do we actually do this? Well, let me tell you a little bit. But I would only caution you one thing, which is don't inundate people with detail because by this point, if they're following along with you on the journey, they already believe in your ability to do it and they just want to make sure they understand what you're trying to do. So give them the high-level detail, answer questions when they come up, but just provide a high-level roadmap of where you're trying to go. And then the last thing, if people have made it this far to where they're willing to hear you make an ask, they are obviously interested. So tell them what you need from them and get them moving. So I wanted to go through a real quick example. I won't tease it out the exact same way I did the presentation in real life, but at our office, we were in a spot where we had a CRM system that was very old and it needed to be replaced. And so there was a little pitch deck where that was a combination of the fact that we need to make this change, but then also that we need to decide between building a system internally and potentially buying one. I'm only going to take a couple slides to just show you like some examples of how I spoke to these things. But so where we started was with, okay, our current system has gone through this maturity and it's in a decline. And what that really creates is some pain points. It's really hard for the people on our sales team to find information. They just have endless obstacles inside of the tool. Part of their job is using the software now, which is really unideal. And it's really because we've piled features into a solution well beyond what it's for, making it really hard for decision makers to make decisions, right? So that was a lot of our why. Because our current architecture kind of looks like this, right? That was kind of the point we took everybody to. So now they're kind of sitting there, okay, so what do we do about it? So our what was really building out this really pretty house instead of the trailer park, right? And so we spent a bunch of time talking about, hey, what could this next thing be? We talked about feature sets, how they can make people more efficient. And then we got into the how, and this was a point of contention where it's like, okay, do we buy something off the shelf or do we custom build something ourselves? And so we had this really good conversation around, do we want to pick fit and finishes and fit inside of somebody else's model? Or do we want to build something that fits with our own way of thinking and our own way of doing work and that creates the creature comforts that we're interested in, not a cold kind of boxed solution? Then we talked a little bit about, hey, so how are we going to do this thing? You know, what's it going to cost? How long is it going to take? But then we hit this ask, right? And this is where we kind of threaded emotion back in. I went back to the point that we're looking at build. We're looking at build so we can get this custom thing that hits the markers we want for the cost we want to pay versus taking something out of the box. And this is where we kind of turned the ask into also an emotional pull, which was, hey, you know, to all the stakeholders, as you go on kind of a walkabout and you think about what solution is going to be best for you, I want you to remember that in the buy world, you're going to be one of a lot of people in a crowd, meaning that each of your really good ideas is just one of a lot of ideas. And your whole support team is going to be this group of people who you've never spoken with and who don't really know who you are, versus working with our product team inside of our own business that knows you, sees you every single day, and is really interested in your collective success. So I think you should think about which solution you're going to go with. And so that's how we did that. We took them all the way from, you know, why is this even a problem, to what do I want them to do? And I think that this is a framework that can work for just about anything. And so there's not necessarily some set of framework tools that you can plug this in, right? There's no package you can download that immediately gives you a library that turns all your presentations into this. But I can leave you imploring you to look for tools and things that can help you think in a narrative way everywhere. I think that's really a big part of it, is start to look for stories, right? And I want to remind you that this kind of stuff isn't easy. You know, you end up agonizing over a single slide that's going to sit on the screen for all of 30 seconds or less. But I think that builds up to a point where you can really resonate with people. So I would advise everybody, as you get into this section, remember that this is a valuable skill set. It's not going to be as easy as filling slides with facts. It's probably going to take longer. It's going to make you a little bit less agile at first. But what's going to happen is you're going to have a much better form for vetting out ideas, and you're going to build that reputation. So I would challenge you to observe everything, right? So find things that resonate with you and use them. I love the movie Interstellar, and I thought it was an interesting way to talk about story and how it matters. Because if you're passionate about a thing, people are going to feel that passion, and then they're going to respond to it. And again, like I said, I would challenge you to look for stories everywhere. Pay attention to the movies you watch, the books you read, the radio shows you listen to. I listen to a lot of like Radiolab, The Moth, things like that. Like listen to interviews. Pay attention to when somebody asks good questions, when they ask bad questions. Listen in conversations to when you're really, really compelled and when you're not. But at the end of the day, I think paying attention in all of these different spaces is going to get you in a headspace where you're really, really primed to be thinking about narrative and how important it is in selling an idea. And so when you are done and you've sat in front of people and you've moved them all the way from pure apathy to acceptance and actually working on your behalf as a change agent, I want you to be standing there and I want you to feel kind of like this. So I'll ask you one more time, how badly do you want your ideas to live? And if you really want them to live, take the time to move people. Thanks again for coming. I'd be happy to answer any questions that anybody has. Again, my name is Ben. This is a real passion of mine, so you're not going to bother me if you want to talk about it. I would love to just talk story anytime with anybody, or, you know, what is that next inflection point? What's the next idea that gets things going? That's stuff that really interests me, so thanks again.